What is good, you guys? It's Lifestyle from lifestyledidit.com, and in today's video we're going to be talking all about reverb. I'm going to go over every setting in reverb so you can really understand what every component on a reverb does. I'm going to be showing you the stock FL reverb, and I'm going to be showing you a wave reverb called Reverb. So I'm going to show you obviously one paid one and one free one that comes with FL, and I'm really going to explain this because while you're using reverb you really need to know what it's doing instead of just throwing it on and yeah, you know it adds a tail to the sound, but what do all these knobs do? How do you tempo sync your reverb so the tail of it cuts off before the next audio part comes in? Like, let's say it's a vocal, or we could take a snare and let's say we want the snare to have a reverb until the next snare comes in so they're not washing over each other. How to create a room, shape a room, EQ it all inside the reverb. So let's just talk about that and let's get straight into it. All I did was throw the fruity reverb. So this one down here is going to be off, but this is the other paid one by Waves that I'm going to show you guys later. But the first thing we're going to look at is the FL reverb because obviously a lot of people are going to be using that. So you see all these different settings and you might know what some of them do, you might know what all of them do, but I'm just going to go over every single one and really explain what they all do. Alright, so the first thing you're presented with is mid and side, right? You can switch between these two. So kind of the easiest way to explain this, I would make sure to go really read in on this so you can understand. Some reverbs just like this one let you choose, do you want to affect just the mids or you want to do some mid-side processing? Okay, so we have frequencies that are real heavy in the middle and we have frequencies left and right. So on this you see a lot of action going on in the middle, right? And then over here you see a little bit on the right side and a little bit on the left side. So what this basically means is if we were to have FL on mid, we would be affecting everything you see right here. Now on the sides, yes, you would hear a little bit, but what we're really telling the reverb is to focus on these middle frequencies in the spectrum, right? If we flip it over to side, we're going to be affecting what's over here. So why would you want to use mid? Why would you want to use side? Say for right now, we're going to put it on this clap. Most of the clap is going to be coming through this center of the spectrum, right? Now, if we were to be on the master track with the reverb and we want to add some space to the entire mix, maybe we don't want to muddy up by, using mid and actually adding it all to everything that's going on in here. We want to add it more to just what's on the sides of the mix over here and over here, right? So really, we're going to be using mid most of the time for our reverbs, but if we were to put it on like the master bus and we want to just add a little bit of tone and a little bit of room to the whole mix, we could switch it over to side, and what it's telling the reverb is focus more on the side frequencies, not on the main mix in the middle, just the sides, and add a little bit of tone to them. Most of the time you're going to be using the mid option, and then if you are adding it to the entire mix, you're probably going to want to go with the side option because it's going to affect more of the very hard left and the very hard right in the stereo field. Then you have these different cuts, right? You have high cut and low cut. All that means is that you're going to be basically EQing out certain frequencies. If I were to press play right now and I take this high cut and go down, the reverb's not going to have high end to it much. It's a little bit more tucked. If I bring this all the way up, we're not really cutting any high end out. So what this could be used for is if you want your reverb to be tucked in the back and not have a lot of high end, you can come right here and just do a high cut on it. So not too hard to understand. Then you have low cut that does the same. If you don't want low frequencies in your reverb, you could turn this up. If you bring it down, you're letting some of that low end through. So you can mess with these and kind of get a sound, but like I said, it's just basically an EQ for the reverb sound, so the tail of the sound that you're giving it. If I were to go right here and turn the wet knob all the way up, you'll hear it more. Right? If I let a lot of high end through, if I take high end out, low end out, high end in, you can hear what you could do with it, right? It's just an easy way to EQ your reverb. So it's built in, it's kind of cool. So we can get this kind of set up. Let's say we just wanted to go with something like this. Then the next thing we have is pre-delay. And what is pre-delay? So basically when you send a sound into a reverb, if you have no pre-delay on it, right when the sound hits, the reverb's going to start. If we pre-delay it, that means that the sound's going to come in and then the reverb's going to start later. I'll show you what I mean. So if I just take this and just go like this, now the reverb's coming in late, right? If we go over here and make it a little bit less dramatic, you hear it has a bit of a delay to it. Why would you want to use pre-delay on a reverb? Let's say you have a vocal track, right? And you're adding reverb to it, but you don't want the vocal to be washed out. You just want to add some space to it. So if you have the reverb start right when every word comes out or every transient of the vocals coming through, it's kind of going to start to wash it out, right? But if you add a bit of a pre-delay to it, then a bit of the word will come through and then a reverb tail will come after it. So you obviously wouldn't have it bah, you know, that late, but adding a little bit of this allows your vocal to still come up front and have space to it. Now, if you want to push something to the back, like you want something to be in the back of the mix, not very up front, you could do no pre-delay. And what that'll do, obviously, is something like this. But if we add a bit of pre-delay, you're going to see now we hear the clap way more, but the reverb's still there. Cool thing is with this, you can tempo sync it. So if you tempo sync and you look up here, it'll start to click on to certain different things. So now it's going to start syncing up with the tempo. And you can go off different quarter notes, half notes, really depends what you want to do. So instead of going in there and figuring out milliseconds, you can just tempo sync it, and then you can get it to lock in with the tempo. So that's really cool. Next thing we have is basically how to create the room. So we have the size of this reverb that we're creating. This would obviously be a very big size. It'd kind of be more on the artificial side. And if we bring this over here, we have a skinnier room, right? So this would be, just imagine you're in a tiny little room or a really huge museum, right? This is how you think of it, the size of the reverb you want. So I'm going to let you guys hear what this sounds like. Starts to get this metallic sound, right? Because you're basically in this tiny little room, and when reverb is very close to each other, it starts to bounce off and you get like a teeny metallic sound. So if we bring this up, starting to sound a little bit more natural. All the way this big, you're getting a really huge reverb, like we're in some type of arena, right? So the next thing you see over here is modulation, and what that does is it actually breaks up that metallic sound that we hear. So if we go over here and we have this tinny metallic sound, so on artificial reverbs, especially if you're creating something that doesn't really sound like something that's real, right? You're going to come over here to this modulation knob and mess with that, and that's kind of going to break it up so it doesn't really sound too tinny, too fake, too metallic. So if we bring this up, it's kind of smoothing it out. It's getting rid of that tingy metallic sound that we get if we wanted a very like skinny, small, condensed reverb, right? Diffusion controls the density of the reflections that are bouncing off the walls. A low diffusion makes the sounds more distant. The easiest way to think of this is to think of it as like the shape of the room, I guess you could say. That's kind of how they're representing it to you, like this. So if we go over here and we set this all the way up here, it's kind of more smooth. We bring it down. We go lower. You're starting to get this triangular feel to it, right? Where it sounds like it's bouncing in like this weird type of room. If we were to mess with modulation and diffusion together, we could start to create different type of rooms that start to sound weird. Or if we wanted it to be something more like this, or a completely smoothened out sound, right? So you can kind of mess with these to get a different room sound if you want to do that. And then speed just controls like the speed of the sine wave that it's creating. So how fast it's going to be moving around to create this. So basically these are kind of just these four right here, just going to mess around and give you the room tone you want. So you can kind of go in here, play around with these and figure out what type of room you want to create with virtual room. You basically are creating your own space and however you want it to sound. You want it to sound boxy and squarish. You want it to sound big, wide and distant. You can do this with all these different parts of this. And the cool thing about this reverb is it kind of gives you a visual, right? So if you want to kind of visualize and see what it's creating, you can do that too. So that's one real cool thing about this reverb. Then you get presented with these four over here. So this bass knob right here controls the bass frequency decay of the reverb. So a bright room would have less bass in it. And if you wanted a darker tone to it, you would have more bass into it. So you can go over here and mess with this bass multiplier. And really you're just listening for sounds. There's no right or wrong with this, but you're creating your own room, your own sound that you want for your reverb. So if we take this all the way down, I'll show you what this does. So if you hear when it's all the way down, like I said, it's a very bright reverb, right? If we turn it all the way up, it's not as bright, it's not as high and heavy. So like I said, again, over here, you can adjust different settings with your high and low cut. This is kind of like another version of that. And you could see, it obviously shows you this would be bright and this would be dark. So they kind of give you a visualize, and that's what's cool about this FL Reverb is it's kind of user friendly and it makes it pretty easy. But for me, I would kind of want more of a darker bass tone. So I'm going to go over here and bring this up. I want more of a darker room. So I'm going to bring this bass tone up. And then we have our decay time, right? So decay time is how long is the reverb going to be. If we bring this all the way up here, you you can hear that reverb never stops. It's just going to be going forever, right? So a cool trick that you could do with decay times is also sync it to the tempo, right? So let's say that we're at 145. We can go to this website called Delay Calculator, and we come right here and we type 145. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us a millisecond of each quarter note, half note, eighth note, 16th note, right? So let's say we wanted to go with whole note. So it tells us that it's 1655.17. So let's just take 1655, right? So if we come over here to our reverb and we go to our decay time, we could really up here set it to 1.6, 1.7. You can't really go in between. You can, however, type in the value right here if you wanted to. 1.6 is going to be fine for me because that's close enough. So what I'm telling you is if you set this to that decay time, watch when I hit the reverb. So if I come over here and I have my clap playing right at the beginning, you're going to hear that it's going to cut off right before the other clap comes in. So it's perfectly timed up with the tempo because I set the decay time. Now, if you do have a delay like we do over here, right, we have about 125 milliseconds of delay, you would need to subtract that from your decay time because it's starting late. So we would actually need to put this to about 1.5 instead of 1.6. And that's because we're starting it late, so we don't need it to be like, let's say we had 1600 for the decay time, right? But we have 100 on our pre-delay. So obviously it's starting a bit later. It's not starting right when the snare hits. So we need to minus pre-delay time from the decay time, if that makes sense. So 1600 is what we have it set to, but we pre-delayed it by 100. So we need to minus 100 from 1600 to give us 1500. So that's why we set it to 1.5. Then we have a crossover, which really just determines what bass frequencies will be transmitted through this. So if you look over here in the top corner, we're telling it 320 hertz, right? So we're telling it everything under that boost up the bass in this, right? So with this, you can go around and just search for what crossover you want to really hone in on and boost, right? And then we have dampening, and all dampening is pretty much another high cut. So if we boost this up, it's going to dampen the reverb and get rid of some of that high end. So if I turn this down, turn it up, you see that when it's all the way up, it's not really dampening much, but when we turn it down, it's cutting out a lot of that high end. So we could come over here, turn this high end down and dampen it, and we'll have a really dark sounding reverb. You have your dry knob, which is your dry sound. You have your early reflections, and then you have the wet knob. If we turn the wet knob down, the reverb's not doing anything. Start to bring it up. Now we're blending it. If we want it completely wet, we just bring the dry down. Right, so you have different things you could do. So we're going to go over here, set this here. Now we have early reflections. So in a room when sound is bouncing off, right, you have your first spot where I'm sitting. We have early reflections, which are going to be on the right and the left of me, and then back. Early reflections mean that when my speakers play and it hits this wall, right when it hits my ear, because the wall's right to the left of me, that's an earlier reflection, right? So if we were to take early reflections and turn it down, you'll hear we're not getting much sound coming immediately to us, right? But if we turn early reflections up, you're going to hear a lot of because we're basically telling the speakers in a virtual form, when the speakers play and hit the side of the wall, increase the early reflections. And the last thing you have is a stereo separator, which really is just a stereo width, which if you bring it over to the left, we're going to be pushing it out more, making it sound more wide, right? You don't want to go too crazy with this because you will start to mess with the stereo feel. You want to make it a little bit more centered. You can go over here and bring it more mono. So like I said, don't just go like this. You're going to start to mess with phase and you're going to make things sound really bad. Just kind of bring it out a little bit if you want it to sound wider, or bring it to the right if you want it to sound a little bit more closed in. So the next one I'm showing you guys is a bit easier to look at. Unfortunately, it costs money, but it is easier to look at. And to me, obviously, it sounds better. I don't like the fruity reverb too much. This is probably one of my favorite go-to reverbs. So on this one, it's a bit easier to look at. Over here, you have your reverb dampening like you saw on the other one, right? Your pre-delay, and it's a lot easier. You could type in like 1.7 if we wanted to, and it just adjusts it right there. You have your decay time, your size of the room, your diffusion, and then different types of decay you can mess with. Early reflections again, but see, they kind of give you a visual of what it's going to be. So you're going to have more early reflections here, less over here. Then your reverb amount, dry and wet knob, and then you have a built-in EQ, which is cool. So it's just like the other one right here, how we had this built-in EQ, But this one's more of a parametric. You could see kind of what's going on. So if we wanted to cut out 120 hertz down here, or we wanted to make it have less high end, right? We can go in here and press play. And we can mess with the EQ, time. We want to pre-delay it. So there's a lot of cool things you could do with this reverb, but Fruity Reverb works fine too. It really depends what you want to do, but I kind of wanted to go over this a bit more because they do have a lot of settings in here that are pretty cool. So just to kind of recap, one of the most important things with reverb is going to be your pre-delay time and your decay time. So when the reverb's going to kick on, and then decay is obviously going to be how long it's going to stay on for. I love to tempo sync my reverbs with pre-delay and decay. Just remember, if you're doing a pre-delay, remember to subtract that number from the decay time you choose, because you're not starting it right on the downbeat. You kind of took it, here's the sound, but you started the delay over here. So you need to take this space right here and cut it out from the decay time so you don't overlap when your next sound comes in. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up. You guys can follow me on all social medias at LifestyleDidIt. Make sure to hit my site, lifestyledidit.com, for everything else. Other than that, drop a comment down below. Subscribe to your boy, push notifications. Thanks.